The sandstorm had left the air thick with dust and grit, a low howl carrying across the jagged rocks of the ravine. Kale crouched near the edge, his scavenger's satchel clanking faintly as he shifted. He had been tracking the trail of warped metal shards scattered by the storm, debris he could smelt, repurpose, maybe turn into a hinge or gear to sell at the next trading post. His eyes, half hidden under a soot-stained scarf, scanned the shadows below for glints of alloy or shattered crystal. Then came the cry. Thin, piercing, not the call of any scavenger bird he knew. It cracked through the wind, sharp enough to still his hand on the satchel. He froze, listening. Another cry, ragged, high-pitched, trembling like broken glass. Not bird. Not human. His stomach tightened. He scrambled down, boots slipping on loose stone. The ravine narrowed, damp with storm runoff, and he found the source pressed against a rock outcropping, a hatchling, scales glistening like molten copper veined with blue light. Its right wing was mangled, membrane shredded, joint twisted at an angle no living thing should bear. Blood shimmered faintly like liquid crystal where the torn edges met flesh. Kale's breath caught. A dragonling. A princess, if the markings meant what he thought they did. And he was the wrong man to find her. The hatchling bared tiny fangs, eyes wide and fever-bright, but the sound it made wasn't a growl, it was a whimper. The wing dragged uselessly as it tried to shift, sending another cry into the stone walls. He could already hear the danger of it. The storm had scattered sound, but if a patrol heard. Kale glanced back up the ravine, every survival instinct telling him to leave. Dragons executed humans for less. Touching one of their young was blasphemy, a death sentence. He should turn, walk, forget. But the hatchling tried again to move, slipped in the mud, and shrieked in pain. Kale swore under his breath and knelt. He unhooked his satchel, fingers trembling, pulling out a ragged thermal cloth. The dragonling hissed weakly when he approached, but it didn't have the strength to resist when he draped the cloth over its trembling body. The copper scales beneath were hot to the touch, burning almost, but he rapped anyway, muttering to himself. "You're going to get me killed, you know that?" The hatchling blinked up at him, pupils like molten silver. Too young to understand words, but something in its gaze made his throat tighten. He slid his arms under its body. Even as a newborn, it was heavier than he expected, dense with muscle and mineral. Its broken wing brushed against his sleeve and he flinched at the heat of the wound, but held tighter. It let out a small sigh against his chest, and the sound hollowed him out. Climbing back up the ravine was harder with the weight, each foothold threatening to give way. Sweat stung his eyes, and every echo of the hatchling's breathing filled him with dread. If the queen's hunters were near, if they caught him carrying her child. He reached the lip, staggered onto solid ground, and adjusted the satchel so the hatchling's form was shielded against him. The storm had passed, leaving the sky above streaked with violet. In the distance, the floating isles glimmered faintly, crystalline spires reaching for the heavens. Somewhere up there, the queen ruled. Somewhere up there, this little creature belonged. But here, now, the hatchling's life was in his hands. And its winged Kale had seen enough broken machines, enough shattered bone and metal, to know it would never mend by itself. Not even a dragon healer could set something torn like that. His mind churned as he trudged toward his makeshift workshop on the edge of the wasteland. The thought was madness, treason. But it wouldn't leave him. Wings were meant to fly. Machines were meant to work. And if a human could rebuild one, maybe he could rebuild the other. The hatchling shifted against him, letting out a soft, trusting sound, and he tightened his hold, whispering to the wind as if it could carry away the weight of his choice. "Looks like it's you and me now." The workshop loomed ahead, half buried in stone, its door marked with the scraps of old starship hulls. Inside, Kale laid the hatchling on a pallet near the forge. The firelight caught her scales, painting them brighter than molten steel. He stripped his gloves, checked the broken wing again, and hissed through his teeth at the damage. This was no simple splint. This was ruin. He sat back, ran a hand over his scarred jaw, and felt the silence press in. He remembered the faces of men strung up after the last rebellion, remembered his sister's scream as fire rained from dragon wings. He should not even think this thought. But he looked at the hatchling again, the way its body trembled in pain but its eyes still tried to follow the flicker of sparks in the forge. A mechanic's hands could build many things. Maybe even hope. Kale exhaled slowly and reached for the alloy scraps. The storm had scattered the world tonight. Maybe it had also brought him this. The forge's heart pulsed with heat, the rhythmic hiss of the bellows the only sound in the cramped workshop. Kale's hands were blackened with soot, scars on his palms reopening as he hammered another sliver of alloy into shape. Sparks showered his boots and died against the stone floor. Behind him, the hatchling stirred, letting out a soft, restless chirp that scraped against his ears like guilt. He had spent hours scavenging through crates of old ship scrap, separating what might hold, what might bend without shattering. Valoring crystal metal was beyond him, he didn't have the voice songs to shape it, nor the resonance tools the dragons guarded. But steel? Titanium? Starship remnants buried in the sands for centuries? Those he knew like an old friend. He tested the frame against his palm. Too heavy. A hatchling could not carry dead weight and expect to soar. He broke it apart, tossed it aside, started again. His mind measured and adjusted with every strike, every turn of the tongs, calculating ratios of balance to lift, the hidden lines of tension in wings that were not his own. The hatchling chirped again, louder this time. Kale set the hammer down and turned. She was awake, half-curled on the pallet, copper scales glinting dimly. Her broken wing dragged against the cloth beneath her as she tried to shift. Her eyes fixed on him, those silver-pool pupils, sharp despite the fever. He crossed slowly, crouched beside her, and reached for a flask of water. She watched him warily, lips pulling back just enough to remind him of the fangs behind them. "Easy, little one," he murmured, tipping a few drops to her mouth. She hesitated, then swallowed, throat working in tiny jerks. After a moment, she leaned into the flask, drinking greedily until he pulled it back. "Good." His voice was rough, low, like speaking to a fragile machine that might break at the wrong word. The wing twitched again, drawing her into a soft cry. Kale winced and looked down at the mangled joint. Even through layers of cloth, he could see how twisted it was, how shards of bone or crystal jutted like broken gears. No healer could set this. The dragons would have let her die. Not him. He brushed her snout lightly, the edge of one finger against her hot scales. She blinked once, a slow, trusting gesture, before her eyes drooped closed again. Kale stood and turned back to the forge. His chest was tight. He had mended arms for broken exosuits, rebalanced thrusters no man dared touch, rebuilt scavenged drones from fragments. But this was not a drone. This was not metal. This was blood and breath and royalty. He drew a deep breath and reached for his chalk. He cleared a space on the floor and began sketching arcs, measurements, skeletal diagrams of wing frames. His lines curved in mimicry of the surviving wing, though he adjusted for weight, for pivot, for the flow of muscle he would have to graft to steel. Each mark was a heresy, but each stroke steadied him. Hours blurred into one another. He smelted thin rods, bent struts, shaped the beginnings of joints that might flex without locking. His scars burned from the heat, sweat dripping into his eyes, but his mind refused to loosen its grip. He thought of his sister, of her voice begging him to fix the broken toy flyer she had clutched the night before the raid. He had fixed it, and she had laughed, and the next day her laughter had been silenced in fire. The hammer rose and fell until he lost count. When at last he stepped back, the beginnings of a wing frame gleamed on the table. Thin, delicate, each curve matching the span of the hatchling's good side. He touched it with one finger, feeling the hum of its potential. It was not alive yet, but it could be. He heard the hatchling stir again, a small shuffle against the pallet. Turning, he saw her watching, head tilted, eyes fixed not on him but on the shining frame. Her pupils widened, reflecting the glow. Kale's throat caught. He crossed the room, crouched again, and let her sniff the back of his hand before reaching to brush her snout once more. She blinked, then looked past him at the frame again, letting out a faint trill. "You want to fly," he whispered. "I know." She shifted weakly, broken wings scraping against the cloth. "Then we'll make it happen." The words felt dangerous, like speaking them aloud sealed a pact he could not undo. He turned back to the forge, pushing himself harder. He reforged pieces thinner, added struts of carbon mesh, interwove scavenged circuits from old drones. His vision blurred, but his hands never slowed. The shape became clearer, more alive with each addition. By the time exhaustion forced him to stop, the frame lay gleaming on the table, a wing of steel and starship bone, waiting for its moment. The hatchling had drifted back into sleep, her breathing steadier now, her small body curled close as if sensing the promise taking form in the forge's glow. Kale sank onto the stool, head in his hands, shoulders trembling. He knew what he had done, what it would mean if the Queen found out. But he also knew the sight of those eyes watching him work. And in that moment, he realized there was no turning back. Kale's hands shook as he tightened the last bolt on the frame. The metallic wing gleamed in the forge light, curved arcs of titanium layered with mesh so thin it shone like silk. It was not finished, not truly, but it was enough to test, enough to see if the madness in his head could match the sky. The hatchling lay restless, stirring against the pallet. Her good wing fluttered weakly, her body pulling against the weight of the broken one. She let out a keening sound, soft and aching, that made Kale grit his teeth. He wiped sweat from his brow with the back of his sleeve and gathered the wing frame in both hands. "All right, little one," he murmured, as if the sound of his voice could steady both of them. "Time to see if you'll hate me for this." She watched him approach, eyes wide, chest rising and falling quickly. Kale crouched beside her, laying the frame gently on the stone. He drew out leather straps he'd stitched from his salvaged stock, then reached for a jar of numbing salve stolen years ago from a dragon trader too drunk to notice. The hatchling stiffened as he touched her side. Heat burned beneath his fingers, scales shifting with faint tremors. He whispered nonsense to calm her, soft words, half lullabies from his childhood, half the murmured cadence of a mechanic coaxing a machine to behave. She stilled a little, though her silver eyes never left his face. He applied the salve to the mangled wing, rubbing it in carefully until her cries softened to tiny whimpers. Then, quickly, before he could lose his nerve, he lifted the twisted membrane and braced it against the frame. She shrieked once, the sound tearing through him, but the numbing spread fast and she sagged against the pallet. Kale worked quickly, securing straps around bone and scale, aligning the broken joint with the forged socket. Each buckle tightened with a hiss of leather, each click a tether between flesh and steel. The wing was heavy in his hands, heavier on her body, but the counterbalance struts distributed the load as he had planned. When he stepped back at last, the sight froze him. The hatchling lay there, half-cradled in firelight, one wing shimmering copper and gold, the other gleaming silver and steel. A creature of two worlds. His breath shuddered in his chest. She stirred. Slowly, unsteadily, she tried to move. The new wing shifted with her, its joints catching at first, then flowing into motion. She blinked at the weight, trilling uncertainly, before pushing herself onto her feet. Her legs trembled, claws scraping stone. Kale reached out, steadying her flank. "Easy." She shook herself once, head to tail, as though testing what was now part of her. The steel wing flexed open, wider than her body, shimmering in the forge's glow. She let out a startled chirp, half fright, half wonder. Kale's heart clenched. The hatchling flapped both wings, unevenly at first, then again with more strength. Dust stirred across the floor, tools rattled on the workbench. She looked at him, eyes bright with something like joy, then tried again. Her body lifted a fraction, claws scraping at stone as if the air itself might yield. Kale laughed, raw and broken, and covered his mouth with one hand. She flapped harder, once, twice, then stumbled forward, nearly tumbling. He caught her, grunting at the weight, and lowered her gently back down. "Not yet," he whispered, breathless. "You're not strong enough yet." But she ignored him, spreading her wings again, the steel catching firelight like a blade. She trilled, impatient, her voice ringing off the walls. Kale leaned back against the bench, eyes closing. He had done it. Against every law, every warning, every memory of what dragons did to men who touched their kind, he had done it. The hatchling strutted across the workshop floor now, clumsy but determined, her new wing dragging sparks where the tips brushed stone. She spread both wide, as though to challenge the ceiling itself, then snapped them shut and chirped at him, demanding approval. He smiled despite himself. "All right, princess. You win. But we'll test you outside, not here. She tilted her head, as though she understood. Her gaze lingered on the forge flame, then returned to him. Trust. Too much trust. Kale's smile faded. The queen would come for her. There was no way she wouldn't. Every wing beat in the sky above would bring that moment closer. And when she came, what would she see? A human tinkerer who had dared to bind steel to royal flesh. He turned back to the frame schematics scattered across the floor, heart-hammering. He would need to refine it further, lighten the struts, add resonance nodes, maybe even coax the wing into responding with smoother reflex. He could make it better, make it perfect. Behind him, the hatchling yawned, curling onto the pallet once more, her steel wing folding with a soft mechanical click against her copper scales. The sound pierced him with equal measures of terror and pride. Kale sat down hard on the stool, rubbing his eyes. His hands ached, his chest ached more. He knew what he had done could not be hidden forever. But for now, in this small, fragile moment, he had given flight to something that should never have flown again. And as the forge fire burned low, he swore he heard the faintest whisper of wings outside, distant, growing closer. The night air was cool outside the workshop, the storm having swept the skies clean. Stars glimmered across the endless black, their light caught in the jagged ridges of the wasteland. Kale stood in the doorway, the hatchling pressed against his leg, her scales hot even through his trousers. She sniffed the air, eyes wide, wings twitching restlessly. The steel one clicked as it flexed, the sound unnaturally sharp in the quiet. Kale hesitated. His hands hovered at his sides, fingers clenching and unclenching. This was the moment. Inside the forge she had flapped, stumbled, sparked joy across stone, but here, the sky stretched open, and the ground beneath fell into endless shadow. He told himself he was only testing balance, strength, nothing more. But his chest knew otherwise. "All right, princess," he muttered, voice low, "let's see what you've got." She trilled, as if she'd understood, and bounded forward on unsteady claws. Dust scattered under her weight. She spread both wings wide, one copper and living, the other gleaming like starlight forged to metal. She flapped once, twice, each beat sending vibrations through the earth. Her body lifted a handspan, then dropped again, claws skittering. Kale's heart stuttered. He moved closer, crouching low, ready to catch her if she faltered. But she shook herself and tried again, fiercer this time. Dust swirled into the air, scattering around them in glittering arcs. With a final push, she rose. Not far, not long, just enough for her body to leave the ground, to hover clumsily, then land with a heavy thump that rattled Kale's teeth. The hatchling chirped, triumphant. She puffed her chest, wings snapping open again in a boast. Kale let out a laugh, one hand pressed to his chest as though it might keep his ribs from shattering with the weight of what he'd seen. "Flight," he whispered, shaking his head. "By the void, you actually flew." She chirped again, bouncing once before attempting it anew. Each time she grew a little higher, a little steadier, though she landed with jolts that sent small stones tumbling. Her steel wings shone in the starlight, reflecting every movement like a mirror to the heavens. Kale couldn't look away. Each beat of her wings pulled him deeper into something he could not name: pride, terror, awe. This was no machine. This was no experiment. This was life reborn through hands that had no right to touch it. The hatchling launched again, wings straining, body pulling higher. She cleared Kale's head this time, and for a brief instant, she was weightless against the stars. His breath caught, his entire being suspended with her. Then she dropped heavily, landing in a stumble that sent her sprawling into the dirt. Kale rushed forward, crouching beside her, checking her scales, her wing, every strap of the harness. She trilled irritably, pushing at him with her snout, as if to say she didn't need coddling. He chuckled hoarsely and wiped sweat from his brow. "You're stubborn," he muttered. "You'll fit right in with the rest of your kind." She blinked at him, eyes bright, and then, before he could stop her, she bounded again. Wings spread, claws scrabbled for purchase, and she leapt into the air. This time she caught a current, a thread of wind rolling down the ravine. The steel wing flexed, catching it, guiding her higher. She rose past the edge of the rocks, past the jagged teeth of the wasteland, and into open sky. Kale staggered upright, heart slamming against his ribs. The hatchling soared clumsily but truly, her body suspended in the air as if she had never been broken. She trilled, a high, piercing cry of joy that echoed against stone and sky alike. Kale's knees weakened, and he sank to the ground, laughter breaking out of him, raw and uncontrollable. He covered his mouth, tears stinging his eyes. She was flying. Gods help him, she was flying. The hatchling wheeled in a wide, uneven arc, steel and flesh working together in defiance of everything Kale knew of dragons, of law, of fate. She dove low, nearly crashing, then pulled up again, wobbling but determined. Each turn grew surer, each beat steadier, until she circled the workshop in a ragged loop. Kale rose to his feet, calling softly, coaxing her back. She obeyed, dipping clumsily, then collapsing into his arms with the weight of exhaustion. He caught her against his chest, laughing and gasping, stroking her hot scales. "You did it," he whispered, voice breaking. "You really did it." The hatchling nestled against him, purring faintly, her steel wing folding with a quiet click. Her trust sank into him like a blade and a bomb at once. Above them, unseen in the darkness, the night shifted. A distant tremor rolled through the air, so faint Kale almost dismissed it as memory. But then it came again, a low, rhythmic pulse, deeper than the storm, heavier than wind. Wing beats. Kale froze. His arms tightened around the hatchling, his breath lodged in his throat. He turned his head toward the horizon, where shadows stirred against the stars. The sound grew louder, closer, until it filled the sky. Not the frantic beats of a hatchling learning to fly, but the thunder of wings vast enough to shake the earth itself. The hatchling trilled softly, head lifting toward the sound. She recognized it. Kale's blood ran cold. He backed toward the workshop door, clutching her close, eyes locked on the horizon. And then, breaking through the veil of starlight, he saw it, a massive silhouette descending, scales glimmering like molten constellations. The air grew hotter with every beat of those colossal wings. The queen was coming. The ground shook as she descended. Dust spiraled upward in choking clouds, and the heat from her wings pressed against Kale's skin like the breath of a furnace. He stumbled back toward the doorway, the hatchling squirming in his arms, her trills rising in recognition rather than fear. The queen landed with a force that cracked stone. Her wings folded with a shuddering snap, spanning wider than Kale's entire workshop before settling against her sides. Scales shimmered as if starlight and magma had been forged together, every movement casting light and shadow across the barren wasteland. Her eyes, two suns of molten silver, fixed on him. Kale's breath caught. He couldn't move, couldn't think. His arms locked protectively around the hatchling even as his mind screamed that holding her only worsened his crime. The queen's head lowered, vast as the roof of his workshop. Hot breath gusted over him, whipping his hair, burning his skin. She inhaled once, a sound like thunder drawn into the hollow of the world, and her gaze shifted to the small form pressed against his chest. The hatchling wriggled, let out a joyous trill, and extended both wings. One gleamed copper, radiant in the starlight. The other caught the queen's gaze like a blade, steel, struts, leather, gleaming seams of human handiwork. The queen stilled. Kale's heart pounded in his throat. He lowered the hatchling slowly to the ground, setting her gently on her claws. She chirped, shaking herself, then bounded forward toward the colossal figure before her. The queen lowered her head further, nostrils flaring. The hatchling pressed her snout against her mother's scales, purring. For a moment, Kale thought he might survive. Then the queen's gaze cut back to him. It burned hotter than flame, sharper than a blade. The ground beneath his knees felt ready to split. Another shape dropped from the sky, a dragon smaller than the queen, but still vast compared to Kale. His scales shimmered dark violet, his voice sharp as a crack of stone. "My queen," he rumbled, landing heavily at her side. His eyes darted to Kale, narrowing to slits. He touched her. "Look!" He bound steel to your daughter. A trespasser, a defiler. Give the word, and I will burn him where he stands. Kale's body refused to move. His legs felt carved from stone, his hands empty and useless without the hatchling to hold. He tried to speak, to explain, but his throat worked soundlessly. The hatchling bounded back to him then, trilling, wings flaring. She leapt awkwardly into the air and managed a short, clumsy glide around his legs before landing in a puff of dust. She shook herself, proud, looking up at her mother as if to say, "See what I can do." The queen's molten eyes followed every motion. The steel wing flexed, joints clicking, metal gleaming like another star in the night. The violet dragon Irinder, Kale realized, though he had only heard the name in bitter whispers among humans, snarled. "An abomination. He mocks you, my queen. He dares to twist what was born perfect. Let me end him." Kale finally found his voice, though it was hoarse and shaking. She would have died. Her wing, there was no healing it. You know that. He swallowed, forcing the words past his fear. I only gave her a chance. Irinder bared his teeth, smoke curling from his nostrils. Lies. Human trickery. They poison, they steal, they meddle. That creature is no daughter of Vealora anymore. The hatchling hissed, tiny but fierce, pressing herself between Kale and the looming violet dragon. Her wings spread defiantly, copper and steel together, her body trembling but unyielding. The queen's gaze lingered on the sight, unmoving, unreadable. Her tail coiled, cracking the ground, her wings shuddering slightly as if in some inner struggle. Kale's chest heaved. His knees threatened to give, but he stood his ground, though every instinct screamed to bow, to flee, to vanish. His voice was barely above a whisper. She's alive. She's flying. Isn't that what matters? Silence fell heavy as stone. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The queen bent lower, until her massive head loomed inches from Kale. Her eyes burned into him, scorching deeper than fire. He braced for the end, for the cleansing flame that would erase him from the world. Instead, she turned her gaze back to the hatchling. The little dragon trilled again, stepping forward and pressing her steel wing against her mother's scales. The sound of metal brushing crystal echoed like a chime in the night. The queen closed her eyes. Irinder hissed, outraged. My queen, you cannot. A single lash of the queen's tail silenced him, slamming into the ground with a quake that nearly toppled Kale. She opened her eyes again, molten light flickering with something less certain, less absolute. Her voice rolled like thunder across the wasteland, low and resonant. He has done what no dragon would dare. He has bound machine to flesh, steel to scale. By our laws, it is forbidden. Kale's pulse hammered in his ears. The hatchling pressed against her mother again, purring softly. But, the queen continued, her gaze lingering on her child, she flies. And she smiles. The weight of her words hung heavy in the night air, every syllable a tremor through Kale's bones. Irinder snarled again but said nothing, cowed beneath her gaze. The queen lifted her head, towering over both human and hatchling. Her wings spread slightly, casting them in shadow and light. This trespass cannot be forgotten, she said, her voice like fire caught in stone. But neither will it be undone. Kale's knees weakened. The hatchling chirped, oblivious, and nestled against his leg again. The queen's eyes met his one last time, unreadable, unrelenting, yet not wholly cruel. Your fate is yet to be decided, human. But for tonight, you live. Her wings unfurled, vast enough to blot out the stars, and the air trembled with their force. The hatchling trilled in delight, spreading her mismatched wings wide, as if ready to follow. And in that moment, Kale knew the sky itself had changed. The night stretched on, restless and heavy. Kale barely slept, every sound outside the workshop sending a jolt through his chest. He lay on the cold floor beside the forge, the hatchling curled against him, her breaths rising and falling in soft rhythm. The warmth of her body was strange, so alive, so trusting, as if she had never known she should fear him. But his thoughts refused to quiet. The queen's words echoed in his skull, each syllable seared like a brand, your fate is yet to be decided. He had lived through her judgment once. Would he survive it again? Before dawn, the hatchling stirred, shaking dust from her scales. She trotted clumsily to the door and pawed at it with a chirp, wings flicking. The steel one caught the faintest light of sunrise, scattering it across the workshop like fractured stars. Kale rose, heart thudding, and followed. Outside, the wasteland was cloaked in gray mist, the air cool and brittle. For once, the world seemed quiet, untouched by fire or thunder. The hatchling stretched her mismatched wings, trilled, and bounded forward into a gallop. With a determined leap, she took to the air. Kale held his breath as she climbed. For a terrifying moment, her body tilted, one wing pulling stronger than the other. But then she adjusted, the steel struts flexing, catching the air. She soared in a ragged arc, shrieking with joy, circling back toward him. His throat tightened. He had built weapons, engines, even crude flyers for desperate humans, but nothing had ever flown like this. The ground shook behind him. Kale turned sharply, dread piercing through him. From the mist emerged a line of dark figures, humans. Dozens, ragged and armed, their eyes hard. Their leader, a broad man with a scar across his jaw, stepped forward. "So it's true," the man said, voice rough as gravel. His gaze fixed on the hatchling, now circling overhead. "You've bound yourself to one of them." Kale swallowed. She would have died. "And how many of ours have died to theirs?" the man snapped, his hand tightening around a battered rifle. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the group. "A dragon hatchling? You've lost your mind. Do you think the Queen's mercy will fall on the rest of us because of that?" The hatchling landed clumsily behind Kale, sensing the tension. She hissed, small body bristling, the steel wing flaring as if it too knew defiance. The leader sneered. "We should kill it before the Queen uses it as an excuse to burn us all." Kale stepped in front of her instinctively, his arms spread wide. "You won't touch her." "You'd protect it over your own people," one woman snarled. Kale's jaw clenched. He wanted to argue, to shout that this wasn't about sides, that for once life didn't have to be crushed under hatred. But the words lodged in his throat. All he could do was stand there, shaking, as weapons lifted. The hatchling pressed against his leg, trembling, then gave a sudden cry. It wasn't the small, playful trill he'd grown used to, it was sharp, commanding. The mist around them trembled. A shadow fell across the ground. From above, wings blotted out the sky. The Queen descended again, her vast form a storm given shape. The humans faltered instantly, some stumbling back, others raising weapons in futile panic. She landed with a quake that threw half the group to their knees. Her molten eyes swept over them, then settled on Kale. The hatchling chirped and bounded forward, nuzzling against her mother's massive claw. The Queen lowered her head, her voice rolling like distant thunder. "They gather like insects, ready to strike at what they cannot understand." The humans froze, terror etched into every line of their bodies. The leader swallowed hard but raised his voice, though it trembled. "We only seek to survive. If that thing is your daughter, then you know what your kind has done to us. How many lives burned in your wars? How many homes lost?" The Queen's eyes narrowed. "And what will you do now? Kill my child to soothe your fear?" Her wings flared, casting the wasteland into shadow. "Then I will show you what fear truly is." Kale's chest seized. "Wait." His voice cracked, desperate. "Please. They're afraid. That's all. Don't answer hate with fire. She's proof it can be different." The hatchling pressed her steel wing against her mother again, trilling softly, as if echoing his plea. Silence thundered louder than any roar. The Queen's gaze shifted between Kale, her daughter, and the trembling humans. Her tail lashed once, carving a trench in the dust. Finally, her voice came low, dangerous but measured. "Go. All of you. Scatter to your burrows and remember this day. A single human lies by my mercy. And so do you." The humans broke instantly, scattering into the mist, dragging each other in panicked flight. The scarred leader lingered only a heartbeat longer, his eyes burning with something between hatred and shame, before vanishing into the haze. When they were gone, Kale sagged, his legs nearly giving way. The Queen watched him with eyes that seemed to weigh every fracture of his soul. "You speak for them," she said, not as a question. "And yet they despise you." Kale forced a breath past his dry throat. "I don't speak for anyone. I just couldn't let her die." The queen's gaze lingered on him, then softened, barely, like the edge of a blade dulled by use. She lowered her head toward the hatchling, who pressed close to her chest, purring. Perhaps, the queen rumbled, the world is not yet finished with you, human. And for the first time, her voice held something that might have been doubt or something like hope. The days that followed passed in a haze of tension. Kale hardly dared to leave the workshop, though the queen herself had not returned. Word spread quickly among the scattered human enclaves, the mechanic who consorted with dragons, the fool who had brought doom upon them all. Sometimes, at night, he caught the glint of distant torches, or heard whispers carried on the wind. He knew eyes were watching, waiting, weighing him as carefully as the queen had. But the hatchling knew none of this. She grew stronger with each sunrise, testing her wings in wider circles, learning to balance flesh and steel as though they had always been one. She played in the dust, pouncing on shadows, climbing Kale's forge as if it were a mountain. And when she tired, she curled against him, purring, the sound vibrating through his bones until it felt like the silence of the wasteland itself had been mended. It was during one of her morning flights that Kale saw the dust plume on the horizon. At first, he thought it was another band of humans come to accuse him, but the formation was too steady, too deliberate. The dust swelled, then parted, revealing a column of armored dragons. Their scales shimmered like tempered steel, and each bore the insignia of the Queen's Guard. The hatchling chirped in alarm, swooping lower and nearly colliding with Kale's shoulder before she landed, wings flared. He placed a calming hand on her side, though his own heart thundered louder than her trills. The guards landed in a perfect arc around the workshop, their talons gouging deep trenches into the earth. Their commander, a dragon with scales like burnished bronze, stepped forward. His voice rumbled like grinding stone. Human mechanic. By order of Queen Violora, you are summoned. Kale's mouth went dry. He glanced at the hatchling. She pressed herself against him protectively, letting out a low hiss. The commander's molten eyes flicked toward her, then back to him. The child comes as well. You will not resist. Kale nodded once, unable to find words. He gathered a few tools, more out of instinct than sense, before stepping outside. The hatchling stayed close, her steel wings scraping softly as it brushed against his leg. The guards took to the sky, a storm of wings and heat. Kale climbed onto the bronze commander's back, the hatchling scrambling up behind him. The world dropped away as they soared, the workshop shrinking to a speck in the wasteland below. Wind clawed at his face, carrying the tang of ozone and smoke. The flight was long, the air growing colder as they climbed into the high passes of the shattered mountains. Kale glimpsed ruins below, broken spires, twisted girders, the remnants of cities long since turned to ash. The hatchling clung tighter to him, her small body trembling, though her eyes shone with wonder at the endless sky. At last, the mountains parted, and Kale saw it, the Queen's Citadel. Carved into the cliffs, it rose in jagged tiers of black stone and glowing crystal, vast enough to house thousands. Bridges spanned impossible chasms, and firelight pulsed within the towers like the heartbeat of some colossal beast. Dragons circled above in endless patterns, their wings stirring storms. They descended into a vast courtyard. The ground trembled as the guards landed, lowering Kale and the hatchling before gates taller than any building he had ever seen. They opened with a groan like the grinding of worlds, revealing the vastness within. The throne hall was carved directly from the mountain, its walls alive with rivers of molten crystal that lit the cavern with shifting light. At its center, on a dais of obsidian, the queen waited. She seemed larger here, her wings arching high into the shadows above, her presence filling every corner. Kale's knees nearly buckled under the weight of her gaze. The hatchling bounded forward, chirping happily, before halting when the queen's eyes fixed on her. Slowly, the queen lowered her head, and the hatchling pressed her snout against her scales. The steel wing clinked softly against crystal hide. The hall filled with murmurs. Dragons lined the walls, their voices hissing like wine through broken towers. Some blared at Kale with open hatred, others with wary fascination. A few looked only at the hatchling, their expressions unreadable. The queen's voice silenced them all. The human stands before us. He who bound metal to my blood. Her eyes burned into Kale. Speak. Why did you do this thing? Kale swallowed, his voice trembling but clear. Because she deserved to live. Because no child should die for a broken wing. The hall erupted in snarls and roars, some calling him blasphemer, others demanding fire. The queen raised one talon, and silence fell. She flies, the queen said, her tone unreadable. She lives. Yet by our law, she should not. By our law, his life is forfeit. The hatchling whined, pushing against her mother's claw, wings flared as if in protest. The sound echoed strangely in the vast chamber, more powerful than its small body should have allowed. The queen's gaze softened almost imperceptibly as she looked upon her daughter. Then she lifted her head, eyes sweeping across the assembly. But law is not destiny. And destiny, her gaze flicked back to Kale, sharp as a blade, may not yet be written. The murmurs returned, sharper now, filled with confusion and anger. Kale stood frozen, caught between hope and terror, as the queen's molten eyes pinned him in place. Tonight, she declared, we decide. The human will be judged not by death, but by trial. The hall shuddered with the weight of her words, and Kale felt the ground tilt beneath his feet. The hatchling pressed against him, trembling but unyielding, and he knew whatever came next would decide far more than just his fate. The trial was not announced with words, but with fire. At dusk, horns of bone and crystal blared across the citadel, their sound reverberating through the mountains. Dragons flocked to the central arena, a colosseum carved into the stone itself, vast enough that Kale felt like an ant in the belly of some enormous beast. He was led there under guard, the hatchling trotting stubbornly at his side, refusing to be separated. The arena floor was scorched black, its surface cracked from countless battles past. High above, terraces of dragons filled the stands, their scales glimmering like constellations. The air stank of smoke and anticipation. Kale's wrists were bound, though the rope felt pointless against so many, his resistance would have been nothing. Yet he walked with his head high, though every nerve in him screamed to turn and run. The queen herself presided from a throne of jagged crystal, her massive form framed by the molten rivers that lit the Colosseum. The hatchling bounded forward at the sight of her, chirping, then returned quickly to Kale's side as if she knew tonight was different. A deep voice rolled across the arena, belonging to a dragon with onyx scales and horns twisted like blades. The trespasser stands before us, he intoned. He defiled flesh with steel, binding machine to the blood of dragons. Our law demands fire. Yet our queen offers trial. His gaze swept the crowd, then landed on Kale. Let the trial begin. The rope was cut, and Kale staggered free. He flexed his raw wrists, then looked up as the arena gates opened. From the shadows emerged a figure, Irinder, the violet-scaled dragon who had called for his death before. His eyes glowed with fury barely leashed, his claws gouging the stone. This is folly, Irinder snarled, his voice shaking the walls. Why waste time on judgment? Let me burn him and be done. Trial, not slaughter, the queen's voice boomed, silencing the murmurs that followed. You will face him, Irinder. You will prove your words. Kale's mouth went dry. Face him? The thought was absurd. A man against a dragon, his body against claws and fire. He looked at the hatchling, who trilled anxiously, nudging his leg. For a moment he wondered if he should refuse, but then he caught the queen's gaze, sharp as a blade and impossible to look away from. There would be no refusal. The ground trembled as Irinder advanced, smoke curling from his jaws. Kale scanned the arena floor wildly. His eyes caught on a rack of weapons, spears, nets, crude blades set at the edge of the ring. He sprinted toward them as Irinder's roar shook the air. He seized a spear, its haft heavy in his hands, and spun just as the dragon lunged. Heat seared his skin, the tip of a flame grazing past as he rolled aside. The crowd roared, some jeering, some howling in savage delight. Irinder wheeled, his tail lashing like a whip. It struck the ground near Kale, shattering stone and sending him sprawling. He coughed dust from his lungs, scrambled up, and thrust the spear as Irinder lunged again. The point scraped harmlessly along violet scales. Laughter rippled through the arena. Irinder snarled, snapping his jaws inches from Kale's head. Kale dropped the spear and bolted, weaving between the dragon's claws. The hatchling shrieked from the edge, flaring her mismatched wings, desperate to join. Guards blocked her path, holding her back. Kale's heart pounded, sweat soaking his shirt. He knew this was hopeless. He couldn't pierce those scales, couldn't outrun flame. But then, as Irinder reared back for another strike, Kale's eyes fell on the dragon's wing joints, the softer flesh, hidden beneath overlapping plates. When the next blow came, Kale dove beneath it, seizing a jagged shard of broken stone. He rammed it upward with all his strength into the vulnerable seam. Irinder roared, staggering back, blood and fire spattering the ground. The crowd erupted, half in fury, half in awe. Kale scrambled away, chest heaving, the shard still clutched in his bloody hand. Irinder's eyes blazed. "You dare," he bellowed, fire spilling from his jaws. He inhaled, chest swelling. Kale froze, knowing the end had come. The hatchling screamed. It wasn't a trill this time, but a piercing cry that shook the arena. She spread her wings and leapt, slipping past the guards before they could stop her. With awkward strength, she soared low across the floor, planting herself between Kale and the inferno building in Irinder's throat. The sight stilled him. The tiny body, steel-winged leaning, standing defiantly against the violet giant. Fire wavered in his jaws but did not release. The queen rose, her wings unfurling with a sound like mountains tearing. Her voice crashed through the silence. "Enough!" Irinder snarled, still seething, but he lowered his head under the weight of her gaze. The fire in his throat guttered out, leaving smoke. The hatchling turned to Kale, nudging him with a soft trill, as though reminding him to breathe. He sank to one knee, hand trembling on her back, overwhelmed by the feel of her heartbeat hammering against his palm. The queen's molten eyes swept the arena. "He is no dragon," she thundered. "Yet he struck where strength alone could not. He stands alive where death was certain. And my daughter chose him. That cannot be ignored." The crowd roared, some voices in outrage, others in uncertain approval. Dragons shifted, their scales rippling with restless energy. Kale looked up at the queen, his chest still heaving, and in her gaze he saw not mercy, not yet, but something heavier. A decision not finished, a balance not yet tipped. "His trial is not ended," the queen declared, her voice carrying across the Colosseum. "But tonight, he has proven this, fate may bend, even for those who are not of our kind." The hatchling pressed closer to Kale, purring, her steel wing catching the molten light like a promise. And Kale, shaking, bloody, and alive, realized he had not only survived, he had begun to change the law itself. The arena emptied slowly after the trial, the thunder of wings echoing into the night. Kale remained on the scorched stone floor, his chest aching, his hands raw and stained with blood not all his own. The hatchling leaned against him, her mismatched wings trembling as she purred insistently, as if to remind him he was still alive. The queen had withdrawn to her throne, but her eyes lingered on them. When the last echoes of the crowd had faded, she rose and descended into the arena. The ground quaked beneath her talons. Kale struggled to his feet, swaying, but refused to bow. "You have spirit," she said, her voice softer than before, though still vast. "Too much for one so fragile. Yet spirit alone does not bind fate." Kale met her gaze, though every nerve screamed at him to look away. "I never wanted to bind fate. I just wanted her to fly." The hatchling chirped, pressing against his side, then bounded forward to her mother, flaring both wings proudly. The steel glinted against the crystal glow of the arena, seamless now, as though it had always belonged. The queen lowered her head, nostrils flaring as she inhaled the scent of her child. For a moment, Kale saw not the monarch, but a mother, scales of molten silver glistening with something almost tender. But when she raised her head, the fire in her eyes returned. "Come," she commanded. Guards flanked Kale, leading him through a side passage of the Colosseum. The hatchling followed closely, her claws clicking on the stone, refusing to leave his side. They passed into tunnels carved deep within the mountain, their walls glowing with veins of molten crystal. Heat pressed down on Kale until his lungs burned. At last, they entered a chamber vast and hollow, where the ceiling vanished into shadow. At its center rose an ancient construct, a spire of blackened metal and crystal, entwined with veins of stone. It pulsed faintly, like a heart slowed by centuries. The air hummed with power. Kale staggered to a halt, awe and dread locking his breath. What is this? The queen's voice reverberated through the chamber. This is the crucible. Forged before fire and flesh were sundered. It is the place where trial becomes judgment. She turned her gaze on him. Here, human, your worth will be decided. Not by battle. Not by blood. By creation. Kale's mind reeled. His body was still aching from the fight, his hands blistered and torn, yet her words struck deeper than any wound. Creation, that was his gift, his curse, the one thing that had always set him apart. The queen lowered her head toward the spire. Long ago, humans sought to bind themselves to us with steel. They failed. Their works crumbled, their fires dimmed. But you, her eyes flicked to the hatchling, who chirped softly, you have already crossed that forbidden line. Now you will show us if your path is blasphemy, or destiny. Kale stared at the crucible. Its surface shifted faintly, as if molten veins beneath were waiting for touch. His throat tightened. And if I fail? Then your body will feed the fire, the queen said simply. The hatchling whimpered, wings folding close. Kale knelt to her, stroking the curve of her jaw with trembling fingers. Looks like I don't get a choice, little one. She nudged his chest, eyes wide and unblinking, as though urging him on. He drew a shaky breath and stepped forward. The crucible's heat wrapped around him, searing through his clothes, but not burning. His palms pressed against its surface. Instantly, his mind was pulled inward. He saw visions, the ruins of old human cities swallowed in fire, dragons soaring above as if they had always ruled the skies. He saw broken machines, rusted wings, shattered weapons. And then he saw the hatchling, her eyes bright, her steel wing gleaming as she flew higher than both ruin and fire. The crucible's voice was not a voice but a resonance in his bones. Forge, human. Show what you are. His hands moved instinctively, though no tools lay in them. Shapes formed in the molten globe, gears, struts, sinew and scale woven together. He poured into it all the knowledge he'd ever hoarded, the whine of broken engines, the hum of plasma coils, the touch of steel under his hammer, the laughter of the hatchling when she first took flight. The glow swelled, building into a shape that hovered above the crucible, wings. Not wholly steel, not wholly scale. Something between. They shimmered with light, neither bound by flesh nor by machine, but balanced, alive. Kale staggered back, gasping. The vision dimmed. The wings dissolved into sparks that drifted upward into the shadowed ceiling. Silence fell heavy, broken only by his ragged breath. The queen's gaze was unreadable, her silver eyes reflecting the dying sparks. The guards shifted uneasily, murmurs rising in the heat. The hatchling bounded to Kale, pressing against him, her steel wing clinking faintly. The queen lowered her head, so close he could feel her breath scorching his skin. You forged what has never been forged. Not an imitation of life, but something new. Kale's legs trembled. He thought he might collapse. Then, what happens now? The queen's voice rolled through the chamber, soft but immense. Now, human, I must decide if the world is ready for what you have made. The molten veins in the walls pulsed brighter, as though the mountain itself held its breath. And Kale, exhausted and afraid, knew his trial was not yet ended. The true judgment was still to come. The chamber trembled as if the mountain itself wrestled with the weight of choice. The crucible's glow dimmed, its molten veins retreating into silence, leaving only the hush of dragon breath and Kale's heartbeat hammering in his chest. The queen's gaze remained fixed on him, vast and unyielding, her silver eyes like twin moons watching for cracks in stone. The hatchling pressed against him, steel wing clinking against crystal floor, her small body shivering with a sound too soft to be fear and too steady to be weakness. Kale drew strength from her nearness, though every bone in him felt hollowed. At last, the queen drew herself tall, wings flaring until they eclipsed the chamber walls. This forging has torn the veil between what was and what may yet be, she said, her voice a resonance that shook the pillars. The human has bound flesh to steel, life to craft. Long ago, your kind sought this union and failed. This time, she paused, and her eyes shifted to the hatchling, then back to Kale. This time, the fire does not reject it. A murmur swept through the guards, tails lashing, wings rustling. Some dipped their heads in wary respect, others growled under their breath, but none dared challenge openly. The queen lowered her wings, stepping closer until Kale could see the ancient scars scored across her scales. "You stand at a threshold," she said, softer now. "Your kind were driven from this world because they clung to the old ways of domination. Steel was their master. Fire was their slave. They could not imagine balance. But you, human, you gave a broken child flight, not chains." Kale swallowed hard, his throat dry. "I never set out to change your world. I just couldn't watch her fall." The hatchling chirped, nudging his arm insistently, as if to confirm it. For a long moment, the queen's gaze lingered on the sight, man and dragonchild, bound not by blood or oath but by something simpler, something stubborn. Then she turned to the crucible. With emotion both regal and weary, she pressed her talon to its blackened surface. The molten veins flared, not red but white, as if cleansed of shadow. A deep sound, neither roar nor thunder, rolled through the mountain, and the air grew lighter, as though a burden had been lifted. The queen's voice carried like a decree etched into stone. "Let it be known. This human is not prey, nor guest, nor prisoner. He is forge-bearer, chosen by trial and fire. His place shall be beside the hatchling he has mended. Their bond is the shape of what is to come." The guards shifted in stunned silence. Then, one by one, wings lowered in reluctant acknowledgement. Some hissed their discontent, but none raised challenge. The queen's word was law. Kale felt his knees weaken. The title meant little to him compared to the relief swelling in his chest. He would live. More importantly, the hatchling would be allowed to live and to fly without chains. The queen leaned close, her eyes narrowing with something almost like warning. "Do not mistake this for peace, human. There are those among us who will never accept what you have made. They will see you as a fracture in the order. You will be hunted. Tested again. But if you endure, if your bond holds, then perhaps the world will endure with you." Kale met her gaze, exhausted but unflinching. "Then we'll endure." A low, rumbling sound rose from the queen's chest. Not laughter, not approval, but something deeper, a recognition of defiance mirrored in her own long-ago battles. She stepped back, lifting her head to the vaulted dark. "So be it." The hatchling bounded forward suddenly, wings flaring, and with a clumsy but determined leap, she lifted from the ground. For a heartbeat, Kale's breath caught, fearing she would falter again. But the steel and flesh moved as one, and she soared above the chamber, her cry ringing against the stone like the first notes of a song never before sung. Kale laughed despite himself, the sound raw, choked with tears he hadn't meant to shed. He raised his arms as she wheeled back toward him, landing in a flurry of claws and sparks. She pressed her head into his chest, and he sank to his knees, holding her as though the world itself had narrowed to this moment. The queen turned away, her silhouette vast against the glow of the crucible. "Go, forge-bearer. Leave this mountain while you may. The path ahead will not be easy, but it is yours now. Make of it what you can." Kale nodded, though she was no longer watching him. He rose unsteadily, the hatchling at his side, her wings folded close. Together they walked from the chamber, past the silent ranks of dragons whose eyes followed them with suspicion, with awe, with fear. The tunnels opened to night. The alien sky stretched wide, constellations unfamiliar yet burning bright. Cool air washed over Kale's face, carrying with it the scent of ash and pine. He drew in a deep breath, the first that felt truly free and longer than he could remember. Beside him, the hatchling unfurled her wings, testing the air. She looked up at him with eyes that glowed with both innocence and the strange wisdom of survival. "Yeah," he whispered, brushing her scales. "Let's see how far we can go." And together, man and dragon stepped into the night, not as exile and outcast, but as something new, something neither race nor fire nor steel could yet name. The sky waited, vast and open, as their future began.